Hello and welcome to part 2 of my beginner conquest tutorial. In the last tutorial you learned how the game works, and in this tutorial you're going to learn some of the basic strategies, the basic ideas, the foundations of some conquest theory, and how you can start pushing yourself into intermediate level play towards the end. So the first thing is you need to be familiar with all of these units. Now, let's just go through some of the units and what their main features are. So, the 100 damage units are the Scout, Foot Soldier, and Archer. The Scout can move very far. He has 6 movement. So, the Scout is also a very important unit because he's cheap. He only costs 25 squad resources. So the Scout can hit far away, and if we buff him up with commands, he can also hit very hard. So he's going to be an important backbone of many strategies. The Foot Soldier has 300 health from, so the Foot Soldier is going to be a bit of a tank when you're playing these games. The Halberd has 200 damage, and he has 2 extra range, along with 200 health. So he can take a hit from any of the 100 damage units. He is particularly the bane of archers because they can hit something that's 6 squares away, and the halberd can move 4 and then hit 2, which is exactly where the archer would be. So the halberd is kind of the bane of archers many times. So the archer is very slow. He has only 3 movement, but he can hit 6 squares away. So that's 9 in total. And he starts to become expensive. He costs 100, but notice he has very low health, so he's going to be weak to scouts. When we go over some of these commands, you'll see why. Same thing with the mage. The mage is also a weak unit. She has 100 health, costs 100, so very much like a glass cannon, she has 200 damage and 4 range. Now, knights are a lot better than mages and archers. They have 300 damage and 300 health. However, they're still going to be weak to scouts, as we'll be covering later. Champions are a very important unit to have. So champions have 400 damage and 500 health. So 500 is a lot more than any of these other units can hit. Now, a lot of the strategies are going to be revolving around champions and their weaknesses in particular, which is what we have commands for. These commands are going to give us the different weaknesses we can exploit from our opponent. So first and foremost is Battle Cry. This is going to give a unit 200 damage and 200 health. So not only is your unit going to be able to deal more damage, but he's also going to be able to take a bit more damage. So the champion that has 500 health, he's going to be pushed up to 700 health and 600 damage. If he's at full health, he's going to be pretty much invincible, unless the opponent has some of the more expensive commands, as we'll see in a few seconds. But Battle Cry is one of the commands you start off with, and I would recommend you always have Battle Cry. I have not seen any successful strategies in high-level play that do not use Battle Cry. And second, to form the backbone of our strategy is going to be Charge. So Battle Cry and Charge. Charge lets you move a unit double the distance. So with Battle Cry, he gains 200 damage, and Charge he gains twice the distance. So you put Charge and Battle Cry on a scout. The scout's going to hit something for 300 damage at 13 squares away. So if the scout is on the 7th row of the board, then the scout's going to be able to hit pretty much anywhere on the board. So you can attack something very hard from almost anywhere. So Battle Cry and Charge, these are the 2 commands you really want to save for something important. You want to get something that's worthwhile. So, for example, Scout might use Charge and Battle Cry on a Knight, because the Knight has exactly 300 health, and he's worth 100 squad resources, 100 command points. You don't really want to use Charge and Battle Cry on foot soldiers because they are very inexpensive. You want to use it on something that's more worthwhile. So halberds are a good second option. They cost 75. And another thing is going to be champions. If you hit them with a scout that uses Charge and Battle Cry, the champion is going to be down to 200 health. And from there, you have many different options to take out the champion. You can use another scout with Charge and Battle Cry. You can use the extra range on a halberd to perhaps charge the champion later and take off that 200 health. I would not recommend using any archers or mages, but they're still an option to be aware of. Maybe you're playing someone who's using archers and mages, and you have to be aware that they can use these commands on them as well. Knights could also potentially kill this champion, or you could use your own champion. He's going to have a lot more health, and when you're buffing him up with your own commands, that 200 HP champion's not going to stand a chance even if he has his own commands. So Battle Cry and Charge form the backbone of your strategy. Or of most strategies, I should say. So next up is Stoicism. It gives you 400 health until the start of your next turn. Now with Stoicism, let's say I use it on a champion who's at full HP, so he goes up to 900 HP. The enemy halberd comes along and smacks my champion for 200 damage. Well, when it's the start of my next turn, my champion is still going to be at full health, because it takes away the health from the Stoicism before it takes away from the champion's actual HP. It's a very general purpose command, just to let you tank some extra damage. Maybe you've got one of your units over in their base, and you have to do as much damage as possible. Stoicism lets you survive another turn. Or you could use it to defend. Maybe they're over in your base, and you have to use it to protect one of your more important units. Similarly, Chastise can also have a dual purpose. It makes it so your opponent cannot select a unit. However, this unit will be able to counterattack if you don't defeat them. So that's a common mistake I see a lot of players getting into. So Chastise will allow you to stop a unit in its place for one turn, and it has a cooldown of 3. That's very short, and it costs 50. It's not very expensive. In addition, you can walk up and you can attack one of the enemies if they don't have Chastise themselves by walking up and using Chastise. They might be forced to use a command to defend, or best case, they don't have any commands to defend themselves. However, walking up and using Chastise is not a good idea if they can use Chastise back on you. Then there's Regenerate. Regenerate will allow you to heal off any of the damage one of your units has taken. This is mostly used on champions. I can't really think of anything else it's commonly used for in top level play. It's gonna make it so that the enemy can't really use Charge and Battle Cry on your champions, because you'll just be able to regenerate that damage off. However, you have to remember that Regenerate is a costly command. It costs 150 squad resources. That's also going to mean it costs 150 command points. You're going to have to store up a lot in order to regenerate. So that's one of the drawbacks to using Regenerate. Vigilance is also a cheap command that cools down quickly. It makes it so that your troop will counterattack first when the enemy is trying to attack you. You're only going to counterattack if you're in range of the enemy, of course. So if you use Vigilance on a champion and they end up hitting you with a halberd, your Vigilance won't do anything. You also have to remember they can use some of these commands to negate some of that damage that you're counterattacking them with. Next, there's Bombard. It costs 200, it's very expensive, and it has a really short cooldown. You can use it every other turn, and it does 100 damage to any enemy unit. So Bombard is a particularly tricky command, so you not only can use Battle Cry on one of your champions to kill another champion, but you can use Bombard on a champion and then attack it with your own champion to kill it. So you don't really have to wait for this Battle Cry to cool down in order to kill another champion. But again, it's a very costly command. You have to store up a lot of command points in order to make use of it. Then there's Shield Wall. It'll reduce all of your damage to 100 until the start of your next turn. You have to remember, though, they can use Bombard and then attack you when you have Shield Wall, so that's 200 damage in total. So just beware that that might be something when you have Shield Wall. And finally, we have Winds of Fate. So a random command is going to get cooled down for you. Any of the commands that you currently have on cooldown. Now, this is cool if you like to, play dice games. You like to take a chance, which one are you going to get? Is it going to be the one that wins? But you don't really have to play this rolling the dice. Let's say you don't have any commands on cooldown. You could use Battle Cry and immediately use Winds of Fate, and since Battle Cry is your only command on cooldown, you're going to get the Battle Cry back, so there's no guessing in what you're going to get back. So let's think of how we might use some of these, past just the charge and Battle Cry. So some of the more obvious ones we can talk about are things like Regenerate. So let me get just a scout Regenerate. So you're going to be able to charge in Battle Cry your enemy's expensive units, but if your only units are pretty much just two champions, you can squeeze in a Halberd and have some extra for something like Chastise or Shield Wall. But your enemy's not really going to be able to use Charge and Battle Cry on your champions because you can just regenerate that damage off. I should say they can't use Charge and Battle Cry with a Scout because that's only 300 damage. If they use it with a Knight or a Champion, your champion's going to be dead in one hit and then your Regenerate won't have any use. So you have to find another command that goes well with Regenerate. Now, maybe all of these work, maybe they don't. Let's just try and think some of them through. Stoicism gives you some extra HP, so you could hit an enemy while you have Stoicism, and then you could regenerate all of that HP back. So this might be good if the enemy has Battle Cry and you use Stoicism to hit through that Battle Cry, and then you regenerate all of that damage back. That's actually one of the main tactics for using Stoicism and Regenerate in conjunction with one another. Now, you can also use Chastise. This is a very general purpose command. I would highly recommend it. It's very easy to use. And many times, you're put at a disadvantage if you don't have Chastise. Because, like I said, the enemy can walk up and use Chastise, and it's a very short cooldown, and you have to use one of your other commands, like Stoicism, which has a longer cooldown. So, another thing about Chastise, I should mention, is it doesn't work on the enemy's very last unit. So, if you get into an endgame and you have Chastise, you're actually at a disadvantage now, because that's effectively one more command you don't have. So next up is Vigilance. This might go with Regenerate. Probably not the best choice. It just means that you counterattack first. It doesn't really do anything to negate damage, I wouldn't say. And it's not exactly that defensive. Basically, Vigilance gets outclassed by every other command. They can use Battle Cry and nerf some of the damage. Stoicism will pretty much negate all the damage and have some left over. Chastise are going to freeze you. Bombard, Vigilance isn't going to do anything. Shield Wall is going to negate some of that damage. Regenerate, they can regenerate the damage off. So Vigilance is not a very good command if they have almost any other command that they can use. Perhaps you can find a tactic where by using vigilance you're forcing them to use another command. Maybe that's something you can look into, something you could try. Now, Bombard, does Bombard go very well with Regenerate? I think not. It's also a very expensive command. You don't really want to have two of the expensive commands with each other. Shield Wall might go very well with Regenerate. You can use the Shield Wall to soak up some extra damage before you have to regenerate. And it'll also cut any benefits they'll get from something like Battle Cry. So you can just hit straight through someone with Battle Cry and only take 100 damage. In addition, you could use Shield Wall with Battle Cry, and your unit will effectively be invincible for a turn. Now, Winds of Fate, does this go well with Regenerate? Actually, it might. So the idea is that you stall as much as you can, you get as many command points as you can. The limit is actually 1,000 in a game. But you stall as much as you can, and then you're going to be able to use Winds of Fate and Regenerate as often as you want, pretty much. So you're going to do something like have a champion approach and use Battle Cry, and with the extra health from the Battle Cry, they can't really do anything to you. And then you can use Winds of Fate and use Battle Cry again. If they ever try to hit you, you could just regenerate the damage off. And that's the basic concept behind Regenerate and Winds of Fate. You have to stay back. You can't be very aggressive until the very end. So some other tactics we could think of. Bombard. Bombard seems like a pretty obvious tactic. You're just going to camp in the corner for as long as you can. You're not going to really try to be very aggressive. You're just going to protect your champions because you only have 50 resources left over. And that's probably going to go to Chastise because, again, you want to stop them. You want to stall. You want to be defensive. Things like Shield Wall are used aggressively when you want to try to push yourself forward and attack the enemy. So with Bombard, it's probably going to be Chastise. So Winds of Fate we discussed. And then there are some of the more general purpose commands. So you could use something like Stoicism. This is very general purpose. It's very cheap. So you use Stoicism and some other cheap command like Chastise or Shield Wall. And you're going to have 125 squad resources left over if you have these 8 scouts and 2 champions. I would recommend you start with and then upgrade from there. You could upgrade to something like a foot soldier and 2 halberds. You could swap out this foot soldier and halberd for a scout and a knight. The knight can potentially kill a champion, but he's also a target for those scouts that use charge and battle cry, you have to remember. You could do 3 foot soldiers and 1 halberd, and you can mix and match plenty of different things. So you could use Stoicism and Chastise. There's also Stoicism and Shield Wall. The idea behind this is your champions are going to do as much damage to the enemy as possible. We call this rush because your champions are just rushing to the enemy to use these commands and to deal out some damage. And then when all of that mayhem is done, you have a second champion to bring up and just clean up whatever's remaining. Now there's also Vigilance. Again, Vigilance doesn't really do too much. It's probably the worst command of all of them. But hey, it's there. You have 25 more resources. Maybe you want that extra foot soldier. You could have like 2 foot soldiers, 2 halberds. Foot soldiers are particularly good for warding off enemy scouts because it's not worth using battle cry on the foot soldier. because your enemy's champion might recapture and then use charge and battle cry on your own champion. So they're going to get a whole champion out of it. You're just going to get a foot soldier from your use of battle cry. Now, the reason I was saying earlier that you can use charge and battle cry on a scout to kill something like a halberd is because you still have halberds to defend yourself with. Halberds are what you're going to use to stop enemy champions from incoming. If your halberd is up 3 or 4 spaces from your champion, the enemy champion cannot use charge and battle cry on your champion without getting hit by the halberd. So halberds do ward off enemy champions, very much so. And there is some debate on whether you should use charge and battle cry on a scout to kill the halberds first, or to get a champion first. But that's something for you to explore. So the set I am going to use is going to look something like this. And another basic and important concept is the formation. So your formation, you're going to want to be able to protect your expensive units, right? So we do that typically with a wall like this. So when an enemy, let's just say a champion is incoming, and we don't have that halberd up in order to ward him off, we can move a champion back in, and then we can either close the wall by moving a scout over here, and then they would have to move all the way around the wall to get to our champions, or perhaps they could try to put a hole in it first, and then we would close it again. We could bring our champions out whenever it's time to counterattack, or we can close the wall by pushing a halberd back, or maybe a foot soldier. You have to remember, all of these units are what are protected by our champions. These units over here aren't going to be protected. So this is particularly important if you have a set that can't use any halberds, like Bombard. Bombard doesn't have really any resources left over to have anything more than 8 scouts, so they're not going to have any halberds. So Bombard has to make a lot of use of boxing champions in. So now that I've explained some of the basic concepts to you, let's see how we can utilize them in a game. So the first thing you want to do is look at what your opponent has. You're going to want to calculate how much their units add up to, and then what they're going to have left over for commands. So champions are 200, so 400 for the 2 champions. Archers 100, that makes 500. A halberd is 75, so 575. A scout is another 25, so 600. 4 of them make 700, and a foot soldier makes 50, 750. So they have 250 squad resources left over for commands. So I'm going to gain some space with my scout here. So what could they do with this 250 left over for commands? Well, I said always have charge and battle cry. If they don't have one of those, you'll see very easily how you can take advantage of that. Perhaps I can get my opponent to waste either charge or battle cry, and I will counterattack them while they don't have it in use. So that leaves them 100 for 2 other commands. Now that's going to be one of the 250 resource commands. And that's either going to be, that's going to be 2 of one of these. Charge, or not charge, chastise, shield wall, or vigilance. So he's got 2 of those. Most likely. He might have stoicism and just not a third command, but that wouldn't make very much sense. Sometimes you do see it, however.